This episode of the Old Soul, New Soul Astrology podcast is brought to you by the Fun Astrology 101 course. If you'd like to learn the language of astrology in a fun and easy way, go to funastrology.com and check out the 101 course. It's right there on the homepage. Welcome into the Old Soul, New Soul Astrology podcast. Thomas Miller along with Robert Glasscock, and we're going to tackle a subject that has created some challenge. All right, we're talking about the nodes of the moon. So to set this up first, here is a question from Kathy, one of our longtime listeners.
Hi, Thomas and Robert. This is Kathy. I have been following you both since the beginning of your podcast. Worked with both of you in a practicum a couple of years ago for horary, and I just love you both so much and what you're doing with your podcast. I've listened to every episode. I re-listened to an episode recently about the North Node and South Node, and I realized that Robert leverages those in reverse from what I've learned from many other astrologers and books, which is that the North Node is about our evolution and the South Node is about our past lives and knowledge and wisdom that we came in with. But according to the podcast, Robert leverages those in the opposite way, meaning that the South Node is what we're evolving to, and the North Node is past lives and what we came in with. I'm just curious if you could comment on that, because I'm pretty sure you both have also heard that other people use that in reverse order. And I was just curious. I have done some research since I heard Robert say that, and it's showing up in a very interesting way for me. So I was just wondering if you could comment on that. Thanks so much.
And I wanted to drill down on we're getting the same questions. So this is why we're going to unpack this. And Robert and I are going to kind of take two different corners on this, because I have the background of the same interpretation that Kathy was talking about. And somebody else in YouTube left this comment. She said, like Robert, my North Node is in Cancer at 21 degrees, but in my 12th house, and the South Node is in Capricorn in the 6th. I'm confused about what this means. I don't feel that my work is my primary focus, like Robert was saying. I feel the focus is on my 12th house of healing and spiritual growth. So can you explain the North Node in Cancer in the 12th house? So, Robert, let's just first start by acknowledging these two different viewpoints that are out there. And I know we've done several episodes on this in the past. The viewpoint that I came up with is that the South Node represents, as I like to say, kind of a karmic knapsack over our shoulder. It's stuff that we are dragging into this life from the past that we didn't resolve previously. As in my own case, let's just use an example. My family situation is going to probably be some unresolved karma. That gets forwarded down the line. We'll have another opportunity to deal with that. So that, to me, is the South Node, stuff that we didn't get done that is just not going to have the opportunity. And maybe it does. I'm not giving up hope. I'm not. But just to say, we all will leave this lifetime without things being completely all buttoned up. I mean, except for the super saints. Maybe some. But for us normal commoners, no. I mean, we'll have some residual. And the solution to that is over on the North Node side. So this is where people are confused, and there is a lot of teaching out there that has that interpretation of the nodes. So that's my corner. Now, let's go back and you clearly define yours.
Great question, and it comes up repeatedly, and I understand it, although my original exposure in the old books, both nodes are karmic. Both nodes are past lives. The ascending node, the North Node, is the point on the ecliptic when you were born where the moon is going to cross the ecliptic going north of the equator, or north of the ecliptic. The South Node is the point where the moon is going to be descending on the ecliptic and going below the ecliptic horizon. So, for example, Reinhold Ebertin, cosmobiologist, describes the North Node as, and I'm going to quote him, the North Node, adaptability, the urge to unite with others, sociableness, good fellowship, obliging behavior. The South Node, Reinhold Ebertin describes as lack of adaptability, unsociableness, antisocial conduct, incompatibility. That's a very thumbnail quick sketch. Both nodes he describes as a tie-up, association, or alliance. Both nodes. So both nodes represent these tie-ups, these associations, and very often they're groups as well as just individuals. The North Node, to me, always has represented good karma, in essence, whatever sign that is in. And she described having her North Node in Cancer in the 12th house. That North Node in Cancer says that she has done well in past lives with nurturing people, caring for people, providing. It's all the symbolism of Cancer. A mother, the idea of being a protective individual, a nursing individual, a woman who contains other people and tries to find their emotional core so that she can love them and care for them and heal them. Her South Node is in the opposite sign Capricorn in her 6th house of work. The implication being that in past lives, she has been unable or unwilling to further her own career ambitions. And this is true for many people, especially women in past civilizations, were very limited. They were not allowed to work outside of the home, and they were not allowed to fulfill their ambitions. They couldn't even today, even in some countries, drive a car without a man. So the South Node in Capricorn in the 6th house can suggest past lives where, for whatever reasons, lack of education, lack of opportunity, and many other things, she was unable to fulfill her career desires. So that in this life, that will be something she should concentrate on with the South Node in Capricorn, finding what it is she loves to do and becoming really good at it, fulfilling herself through her work and through service with the South Node there in Capricorn in the 6th. From a karmic standpoint, her nature, she's born with this inborn ability to love and care for and nurture and protect and heal not only other people, but herself. The North Node in the 12th house, for example, in Cancer alone would make for a good psychologist, a good nurse, a good physician, a good counselor, and so on. And by contrast, the South Node in Capricorn says she's been in past lives, and perhaps the most adjacent past life, she's been unable to fulfill her ambitions. And so in this life, she will have an unconscious need, very strong one, to find and fulfill her ambitions. And in every culture still on Earth, that's a difficult thing for many women. We're certainly evolving. We've evolved. Women didn't have the right to vote in America until 1920, if you think about it. My gosh. So in this life, it's incumbent on her to take advantage of her North Node, her compassion and her caring and nurturing abilities, and somehow integrate those into a career. Saturn, Capricorn, her South Node, a career that she can excel in. Well, let me add this. This is something Linda Goodman told me. I'd been an astrologer for about 3 or 4 years when I met her, but it was true. People who come into your life, who are born, whose sun is within 3 degrees of either side of your South Node, now she was very fatalistic, will be negative people in your life. You may learn a great deal from them, but they will affect you. They will challenge you, in other words. People born with their sun within 3 degrees of your North Node are advantageous associations. They will prove advantageous to you. They may help you in terms of making contacts or teach contacts that help further your aims and so on, depending on the house. So that is a very simple approach and a very fatalistic one, but I have found it to be true. People born with their suns within 3 degrees of the North Node are advantageous, just like Reinhold Eppertine describes. These are advantageous associations. People born with their suns within 3 degrees of your South Node will tend to be, quote unquote, negative influences in your life. They may lead you astray. They may hurt you. They may undermine you. gaslight you and so on, depending. But you can still learn from them, and you're meant to, because you're meant to, in my way of thinking, the North Node and its sign and its house position, but its sign particularly, represent qualities that you have done well with in past lives. The South Node by sign represents qualities that you have not done well with in a past life and that you need to work on.
Okay, now that right there, what you just said, is very clear. The South Node is things you have not done well with in the past. Now, I know everybody right now is trying to catch their breath listening to this, reconciling two different echoes in their own head, trying to reconcile if they've been taught the other system that I've been taught. Well, that's exactly opposite. That is exactly opposite. And I know everybody's going to have to look at their own life real quick here. Snapshot. When you say that, everybody's going to go to their own chart. My South Node is something I do very well. My North Node is something that I have not mastered. In fact, it just got away from me again. My South Node is in Aries. It's in the 10th house. I can work and fight battles all day long. North Node is in Libra in the 4th house. And once again, my family and I are not speaking. That's, I think, what people are feeling is the challenge between, and that's what our two folks have said, is that when they look at their own life, here's somebody who says, the YouTube person says, she doesn't feel like the focus should be on work. She feels the focus should be on the spiritual healing and the growth. I think everybody's torn between this contrast of what should I really be focusing on.
Well, first of all, you've got a matter of dueling authorities and which ones you believe. But if you look at your own chart, which you just illustrated, you've done marriage in the past well. What you have not done well with in the past is self-assertion. You may think you have, but you haven't. The moon in Aries, the South Node in Aries suggests that in this life, you need to learn how to basically live alone, live for yourself, because you've not done that well in a past life. I don't know what houses they fall in your chart, but it's the
10th. But, I can do that very easily and always have been.
Well, no, in fact, you got married and had children and been married twice. You've done that in past lives. But what you now are doing is really what you were meant to learn from that South Node in Aries, to my way of thinking. So again, it depends on which authorities you want to believe. And I don't know why, because Brian Lebertine is the most contemporary one, but the old books that I was reading espouse exactly the same philosophy toward this that I am, is that the North Node is a point of advantage. The South Node is a point of disadvantage. And if you take the concept that those nodes represent karma, past lives, then you're looking at a sign with the South Node that you have not developed well in a past life. So with the South Node in Aries, for example, a typical manifestation of that is an infantile expression of Aries. It's a temper that flares up, but it's not well considered. So it's impulsive and very angry in the moment. It gets over it maybe fast. So learning how to be an Aries in whatever house that falls in your chart is the karmic lesson you're meant to learn in this life. The North Node in Libra suggests the past life of marriage, and marriage has always been very important. So you'll come into this life feeling that marriage is something you can do well. But with the South Node opposite that, you find out that marriage means sacrificing yourself. And that's the dilemma for your life, in a sense. Because what you want to do with your life may not be an occupation, for example, that will allow you to provide for a family and their security and all of those traditional things. And that to really be who you are ultimately demands that you learn to basically not be alone in the sense of lonely, but to be in touch with what you truly want to do and fulfill that, even at the expense of marriage. The North Node in Libra, if that makes any sense.
Let's flip it around just from a mundane perspective for a second, because the axis where the nodes are as we are recording this right now is exactly flipped The south node is in Libra, and the north node is in Aries.
All right, so you're going to have a generation here. It's fairly short term, but nonetheless, it's not like having Saturn in a sign for 2.5 years. But the north node in Aries is a generation of people who have done very well with being individuals and living up to basically on some levels being selfish. It looks selfish. And Aries people can seem to be very selfish. They're not. They can also be very generous. But the truth about Aries is that it is self-actualizing par excellence. It always comes first in its own mind. And that's the point of Aries, is to learn that there is nobody more important than you are in this life. You're born to become acquainted with yourself, to find out who you are, to find out what your talents are, what your weaknesses are, and to develop the talents and help ameliorate the weaknesses and so on. So it's Aries is that. This generation is born disconnected from everybody. They think they're connected because they've got iPhones and computers, but in fact, they're sitting in basements. They don't connect. You see couples at lunch today, even. I mean, these are not necessarily the no lax as you're talking about, but I look at couples, young married couples who are sitting having lunch. They're not talking to each other. They're both on their iPhones, sharing lunch. No interaction. Virtual interaction like we've never had in human history. You can be friends with somebody halfway around the world, but it's virtual. So it's a whole different experience. So, and the challenge then with the opposite, the south node in Libra, is exactly that. Learning how to relate to people on a one-to-one basis in collaboration, in marriage, in relationships. And that's their karmic challenge.
You know, I don't know where these various interpretations originated. You've got the old books, so that probably has a greater historical past, and Vedic, of course, has a long legacy. Maybe, I don't know, maybe this other interpretation of move away from the south node toward the north node is the solution to the south node karma that was left unresolved. Might be a more modern interpretation. I don't know. But the one thing we do know is that a lot of people out there are hearing this perspective, as I said, of move away from your south node karma unresolved. The north node is the solution to it. That I think what to me I'm taking away from this right now is that more elasticity in our interpretation and our perspective. For those of us who came up with the south node bad, north node move toward perspective, that we could open our viewpoint, even though it's going to be opposite what we have been taught, that there is some learning and some application there that we need to open up to and try to explore, even though it's going to be a contrast to what we've been looking at, I guess.
See, I think that it's an illusion to say that we need to ignore one and move toward the other one, that they're a polarity. They're inescapably connected by opposition. The implication in my approach to this, and Reinhold Ebertein's and many other authorities, is that the North Node simply represents qualities that you bring in that you've developed in the past very well. The South Node are qualities that you need to work on in this life. You don't move away from one and toward the other. But you can take advantage of your North Node qualities by sign and be aware that your South Node qualities by sign, you may be, until you become conscious, living those qualities on a relatively infantile basis because they're unconscious and they're not developed, and you're meant to develop them and be aware of them. But it's not ignoring one and moving toward the other. It's integrating both. If you get into Jungian analysis, for example, that whole idea of integration, that's inherent in the opposition. So you're not trying to ignore one and move toward the other one. You're trying to integrate. But there's a very clear message in astrology that this sign quality needs to become conscious in your life and developed in your life. Otherwise, it's going to create problems for you. That's all. And the North Node, by contrast, are qualities that you've inherently done well with in a past life and that you can rely on in this life to help further you. And people born with their sons on your North Node will tend to amplify the North Node qualities by sign. People born with their sons close to your South Node will tend to illuminate those qualities that may be immature in this life and that need to be developed. And they will often be developed through frustrating relationships with those kinds of people or challenging relationships with those kinds of people. But again, it goes back to the very definition of the nodes. One is the ascending node. The north node is rising above the ecliptic. The south node is dipping down below the ecliptic. So if you just take into consideration the definitions, the ascending node and the descending node, that should suggest to you a certain theme about what the two nodes mean, which to me, and I don't know why, I was very early on, way before I ever had read Reinhold Ebertin, was exposed to the notion that the north node is advantageous and the south node is disadvantageous. And it certainly has been true in my life.
Yeah. I'm feeling the struggle inside here. I am so feeling what I'm sure a lot of people are going through right at this moment, is trying to reconcile in their own mind and in their own chart and their own life, and they see it both ways, and they can get yes, I agree with you completely. Astrology is built on polarity, on dualities, the opposition, right? I mean, over there is the answer to over here. I mean, it is that there's just a beautiful symmetry to that very easy to understand geometric position, 180 degrees. So they do work together. They go together. They are intended to work together. And yet we've been analyzing our charts for so long from one perspective and now this perspective. And I think what I've seen, my takeaway and kind of summation of this is going to be expand my horizon. Going to have to do some digging, going to have to do some thinking, probably get out my little journal and do some reconstruction of some things that I hadn't thought through before. But I think that there is definitely openness to both perspectives, because I know a lot of us do see it the other way, where I get it. My little mantra, make love, Libra, not war, Aries. Well, that's a good thing to carry through your life anyway, but it fits that dilemma, and I have an easier time making war than I do making love. But that was until I intentionally and deliberately set my sights on the North Node and started doing things that would bring love to others more. For example, on the Fun Astrology podcast, I often close it saying, I love you guys. Have a good day. That's me trying to move toward my North Node, really expressing love to other people so that they feel it in their bones. And I have never seen a reaction like when I do that from authenticity, and it's nothing like what I see when I put on that hat from the Aries South Node of the Warrior. So here's the deal. We're going to break this into two parts because Robert continues in what will be part 2 of going deeper into my chart, and what he pulls out is truly amazing. Had me almost in tears. So we will roll into that right away so that you can listen forward if you want in that second piece. If you don't, you've heard enough, then you can stop here. But after we recorded this, I went back and looked through various books that I had on my shelf, and everything pointed to the interpretation that I brought to the table at the beginning of this episode. If you are truly interested in diving deeper into this topic, I would suggest the best book that I looked at from my collection was from Judith Hill on the Nodes of the Moon. It was written in 2009. It's readily available. She gives a wonderful, broad perspective. She considers everything. So Robert has his way of interpreting, and that's the way that he has practiced for a long, long time, and it has served him well. And if you get him for a reading, he will give you that perspective. For me, not only understanding my own life, but also interacting with clients, I'm going to broaden my perspective, and I'm going to encompass all of the teachings on the nodes, including I'm going to research Vedic, because I think this is such a key. In fact, Judith's book is called The Nodes of the Moon, The Key to Effective Chart Interpretation. I think it's close to that name. She is also a brilliant teacher. And if she says that's the key to effective chart interpretation, I want to know more. So I know that the way that I've been taught means a lot to me in the interpretation of the nodes for my life. And when I apply it consciously, it works. And as you will hear in part 2, Robert almost brought me to tears with his interpretation. And it really meant a lot to me. So let me ask you the bottom line question. Do you use Placidus, whole sign, or equal house systems? Do you see? I think we're splitting hairs here. Yeah, they all work brilliantly. So we'll leave it here for this episode. Check the show notes if you'd like everything else going on in the podcast, and we will roll right into the part 2 so you can complete this, put a bow around it, and then form your own opinions about the nodes of the moon. So thanks for listening to this one. We'll see you in the next one or down the road on the Old Soul, New Soul Astrology podcast with Robert Glasscock. Thanks for listening, and I love you.